play, I finally evolved, really. I don't know if it's much of an evolution, but I landed on the Gibson-Marshall combo. It started out with the Les Paul, and I think the first electric guitar that I ever had was a Gibson Les Paul copy. And so that was like $100. I think it was made by a company called Memphis. And then the first amp that I had was a little Fender, I think it was a Fender Twin. I don't know if it was a Fender Twin or a Champ or something like that, pretty small little thing. And you know, you start exploring when you first start out because you really don't know that much about you know, equipment and effects and gadgets and all that kind of stuff. So you start out with just figuring out the chord to the guitar to the amp kind of deal. And then along the way I got a MXR Distortion Plus. And that was when I first hit that A chord that sounded like, I think the first thing I played was Cat Scratch Fever. It was once I finally got that sound together. And that was the sound that I was going for, you know, aspiring to. And then, you know, over time, of course, you know, you find out that a lot of these guitar players that you're influenced by and large, all play Marshalls, you know. So then, of course, there was the quest for the Marshall, but any kid knows if you don't have any money trying to get a Marshall, Marshall's like the holy grail. So you finally, you know, scratch and claw and collect enough money or steal enough money or whatever it is, however you go about it, to finally get a Marshall head, and then you've got to get a cabinet and all that kind of stuff. But that was, you know, like 85% of the guitar players that I was into all had Marshalls. And so once I'd established that, that was perfect. Then I wasn't really sure, I hadn't tried out that many guitars yet, so I went through trial and error with guitars for a while, from like maybe the first year that I started playing up until we actually did the Appetite for Destruction record. But in the course of that time, in that few years, I had that Les Paul copy which I stuck through a wall at a studio one time because the neck was so bowed that it was impossible to get in tune anymore. So then I went from there. I think I got a BC Rich Mockingbird, a used beat up BC Rich Mockingbird, which was my mainstay for a while. It sounded great and it looked cool and all that. And then I went from that to a Strat and then another Les Paul, and then I don't know what fate the Strat and the Les Paul met, but then I went through a couple other different guitars. I even ended up with a couple Jackson Strat type guitars, and I had a Les Paul through the club days. Actually, Steve Hunter's from Alice Cooper's old Les Paul. For the early club days of Guns N' Roses, and then that guitar disappeared. And I started picking up some free things here and there. Anyway, when I was in the studio doing Appetite, we were doing the basic tracks, I realized that the guitars that I had did not sound good through the monitors. It sounded like crap. And I was really sort of freaking out because we were making our first record and I didn't have anything that I felt comfortable with. So at the very end of making basic tracks, doing basic tracks, our manager gave me, that's my phone, our manager gave me a Les Paul from a store called Music Works. And I went in to do the overdubs, do the guitar overdubs for Appetite with that guitar, and it sounded amazing. And I had a rented Marshall from SIR, and just something about that studio, those two pieces of equipment and Mike Clink and whatever, that synergy, something that could only be, could only have happened, it could only have transpired in that setup. Just happened, and from that point on, it's like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So I've been doing more or less the same thing. Not always getting the exact same results, but using the same equipment.